Okay, so welcome to the show, Elliot. Great to have you on. It's been a huge week. I mean, it's a huge news week. So let's just jump right into it. Yesterday, the D.C. Appellate Court ruled that Trump is not immune from prosecution. Do me a favor, tell my listeners what you think of the opinion. Is it, as some folks are calling it, a historic ruling that'll be studied in law schools for years, or something else?
I'd say, in response to the opinion, duh, because it's it is perhaps the least surprising legal outcome we've seen in a long time. And they were quite meticulous in laying out the various arguments for why a former president, not even Donald Trump, but just a former president, would not be absolutely immune for his conduct in office. And what they, and I do agree with the folks who said it was sort of written for history and for the ages, because of the fact that number one, it was unanimous, not just they all agreed to it, but they didn't even sign it with their names. It was the three judges speaking in one voice, but also walked through each of the various arguments that he'd made, so that they had many different angles for deciding as they did. And they were sort of saying, hey, Supreme Court, are you listening? We're giving you basically the template for how to rule on this. Do what you want.
I'm just curious, though, because the lawyers that Trump has on this case, you're going to go to the Supreme Court of the United States and ask them to overturn a decision that does not grant an individual, a president, complete and total immunity from any crime that they commit at any point in time. Because, listen, I don't want to shock my listeners or you for that matter, but Donald Trump is not the president of the United States. He's a former president, and the crimes that he's being charged with are not crimes that took place while he was in the White House acting as president of the United States, let's say for national security. These are crimes that he committed for his own benefit when he wasn't president. So how could they possibly think that this is a viable argument whatsoever? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
So I think let's just be nice for just a second. Not even nice, but as lawyers, you view the evidence in the light most favorable to the person arguing. And just for the purposes of arguing today, the maybe strongest argument they had, and this is a stretch, Michael, I want to be clear, I'm just putting this out there, was, well, you want to not chill future presidents in their actions. You want, if you don't immunize presidents for their conduct, then in the future, folks will be afraid to act if they're in the presidency. That the court just shot that argument down, saying that, well, no, you actually want to chill or deter presidents from engaging in misconduct. You want presidents to not break the law. So they sort of shot that argument down. There's really no great argument here that the Trump team had. And they used the powerful and quite pointed language about this is, what was the wording? They said, President Trump has become citizen Trump. And the opinion read almost like a love letter to the rule of law, to the idea that nobody technically is above the law, even former or current presidents, and they even make the point that even some official acts of the president might be subject to to prosecution, not just unofficial acts.
Right. And they brought up at one point in time Barack Obama when he gave the thumbs up for taking out Osama bin Laden. They said, why is he not being prosecuted? I don't think that they understand the difference between something which is done for the national security. Do I need to remind the Republicans? Do I need to remind Trump and his attorneys that Osama bin Laden was responsible for 9/11? That he was responsible for putting, a hit on, Americans? And so how could you compare and contrast what Trump is saying to the actions of a president that's doing it on behalf of national security? I just don't know how you legitimately argue this or expect a writ of certiorari to be granted when the premise behind it is so fundamentally fucked up and flawed?
So let me,
and that's a legal term of art, my friend.
Fucked up and flawed. No, so let me. Here's how you do it, and here's how they do it. And look, you work for them. You've probably seen this up close. And I think the former president is masterful at taking an argument that has a shred of legal legitimacy to it, extending it to its extreme, and saying, "Come on, everybody, look, don't you just see how it goes?" Now, the shred of legal legitimacy was. This goes back to Judge Florence Pan's argument at the hearing, where she said, what stops a president from using a drone to call in a strike on a political opponent? Are you saying that even if a president did that, he'd be seen as immune? And then I think it was John Laurel. I don't remember who the attorney was. Sorry?
What was it, Sauer?
Oh, it's Sauer, right. Yeah, but he sort of didn't really have a great answer for it. I think it was the use of the word drone, which people heard and the president's supporters heard and said, well, oh my God, Barack Obama called in drone strikes. Barack Obama did engage in all kinds of misconduct on the foreign policy. It's simply not accurate. That was national security conduct, not private, personal, or political conduct. Now, you can confuse people very easily by just throwing something out there, throwing some chum in the water, and people who are inclined to believe you will latch onto it. But there's such apples and oranges examples. And what this case was about was, can a president, current or former, use the official tools of the presidency to engage in criminal misconduct? That's totally different than foreign policy or national defense or foreign affairs or anything like that.
But then Judge Pan, I think, continued and said, you know what? Moved it to a different question. Can a president call on SEAL Team 6 to incarcerate or kill his critics? And
Right.
They didn't have an answer for that either.
No.
You know, that the president should have total immunity, total executive immunity. And I could never figure out, no matter, and I've asked this of so many friends of mine who are Republican, can you name a scenario where a president of the United States should have the ability to call on SEAL Team 6 to go after a critic or a political opponent? And of course,
There's
nobody can give
no answer.
There's no answer. You know, it then brings me to the next point, which I had said to them. Well, let's assume hypothetically that the Supreme Court accepts this notion that a president should have total immunity from anything that they do. Taxes,
They won't.
grabbing them by the pussy, what makes no difference, whatever it is, that they should have total immunity. Well, doesn't that apply to Joe Biden as well? So then if in fact that this is their theory and it gets granted by the Supreme Court, why then should Joe Biden not turn around, call on SEAL Team 6 to go to Mar-a-Lago and drown the fat cow? And he's allowed to do it with impunity. And I'm not saying that it should be done. I'm making a joke out of the whole thing because, you know, the expression, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. This is not only for Donald Trump. Right now, shocker, Joe Biden is president of the United States. So if you give him total immunity from anything, regardless of how crazy the illegality is, why should Joe Biden then not take it? And why should he not run with it?
That's one of the, well, number one, I'm not going to endorse the drowning of anyone, candidate or
I'm not endorsing it either.
I know you're not. I know.
I was trying to be,
I
make
got
it
you.
as stupid as possible.
As stupid as possible. No. So, Trump
because you do know that Donald doesn't swim, right?
I did not know that. I understand he's quite a tennis player. I did not know that he couldn't swim.
Oh, he's not a tennis player. He's a golfer.
Oh, I thought he was.
No. He's a golfer.
No. Everybody knows he's a golfer, but a tennis pro I had
he's not a
once
good
said
tennis
he was
player. No, but he also can't swim. He doesn't want to get his hair wet.
All right, fair enough. I mean, swimming is intimidating to many, many people. We'll give them that. But no, fair enough. So, they tried to make the argument that, well, in the future, the floodgates will be opened up and future presidents will be subject to being targeted for their actions. And the court actually shoots that argument down because the court says, no, in our country, we have plenty of checks on people's behavior. So, for instance, this idea that now every president's going to be charged with crimes and every president's going to be impeached. Well, no. In order to be charged with a crime, you got to go to a grand jury, have a judge look at the charges, be tried in an open court, and then have a jury agree unanimously to your verdict. This idea that now the floodgates would be opened against presidents of the United States is just silly and nonsense. And then, to your specific point about Joe Biden, same thing. Like you said, good for the goose is good for the gander. This is not just. They ought to start seeing this as not just protection for Donald Trump, but is this really the direction you wish to go down for the future of the presidency, which will, I think it's safe to say, also involve Democratic presidents in the future in divided governments. And I just think either they haven't thought through the argument or have and are just trying to make the argument today just for the protection of former President Trump.
Yeah, you know what also proves that point? 44 presidents before Donald Trump were not indicted, incarcerated by a political opponent, but there was a transfer of power.
Yeah. I'll take that a step further. This came up or comes up in the concept of impeachment, where everybody says, oh, now impeachment's going to be so much more partisan and political. And I use the examples of George W. Bush and Barack Obama, both of whom faced divided government and really fierce opposition from the other party. Neither of them faced serious impeachment pushes. And this idea that now, because Donald Trump was impeached, now every Democrat's going to be impeached. No. When people engage in misconduct or high crimes and misdemeanors, or at least are accused of such conduct, yeah, they could be impeached. But this idea that now we're going to prosecute every president, we're going to impeach every time we have divided government is just silly.
Staying with the Supreme Court with this decision,
yeah.
It appears to me, at least, that the Supreme Court, the majority of them, want to manipulate every aspect of American life, from abortion to the EPA to whatever. Do you think that this immunity case will prove too enticing for them to pass up?
That's a great question, and I just don't know the answer to that. And I mean that, Michael, because I'm of two different minds on this point. Number one, we started talking about the strength of the lower court decision that just came up, and it was written well. It's unanimous. It's not going to be overturned in all likelihood by the full Court of Appeals, right? Which is when you look at the criteria for what it takes for the Supreme Court to take a case on, is there a split? Is there a divide across the country in the law? Do we need to resolve something? So on the one hand, factors seem to suggest that the court ought not take it because they've got a pretty clear, well-written decision from three really smart judges. On the other hand, they could want to say that, this is such an important issue dealing with the future of America and how we read our Constitution that we have to be the one, even if we just rubber stamp the opinion that came before, we have to be the ones to talk, not outsource this to two lower court judges. I don't know if it'll be too enticing. I mean, look, they are, and starting with Bush versus Gore, I think, facing a bit of a crisis in public confidence about the court's ability to stay neutral or apolitical. And I think the court has been dealing with ethical issues for the last several years. There's the role of Justice Thomas and all the mishigas surrounding him. So the question is, do they want to be seen as thumbing the scale or weighing in on a political issue? And I'm sure Chief Justice Roberts is weighing that very decision very carefully. I just don't know the answer to this one because I could see it going either way. But if it's just a question of on the facts, on the paper, on the law, yeah, they got a great opinion they don't even need to take up.
I don't think that they can write a better opinion than what was written by this D.C. Court of Appeals. I mean, I really don't. It was pretty, what is it, like 52 pages long, but it's so well thought out and it's so well stated. I'm not even sure that there's truly a constitutional issue here for the Supreme Court to even look at. I mean, this is like making up some sort of nonsense and asking the Supreme Court to weigh in on it simply because you're Donald Trump. Who the fuck cares? Who cares who you are?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they vote it down and give any of the judges who are dissenting, any of the justices who wanted to take it up, an opportunity to write a scathing dissent saying why they should. I don't know if they just make it go away. But you're right. It's, and even I'll even push a step further. We'll probably, by the time you and I are done talking today, talk about Colorado and the 14th Amendment going to the Supreme Court. Even that, I think, is a closer call than this.
Me too.
There's just literally, whether you say this was private conduct as opposed to official conduct, or whether you say the Constitution did not intend to exempt presidents, there's just no ambiguity to me in this case. And if the court wants to issue a one sentence decision that says that and say, we agree with everything that came before us, maybe they just deny
the writ of certiorari. That's what I think it would be the smartest move for them to make at this point. And just listen, there's not a triable issue here for the Supreme Court to take up. And you're right. If there are dissenters that want to, who do you think would be a dissenter in this case?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, it's Thomas is the most strident of the, and Alito to an extent when it comes to sort of the contrarian voice on the court increasingly. But who knows where they go? I mean, who knows?
Do you know that they're actually going against themselves if they would overturn this case? And I say that, again, not because it's Michael Cohen saying it. I am just using Donald Trump's own words. He wants to rewrite the Constitution on day number 1.
He said it.
That's not my words. That's Donald's words.
Him, yeah.
And in so doing, another thing he said he wants to do is he wants to destroy America's tripartite system of government. No more judiciary. No more legislative branch. All power conferred upon the executive branch to the chief executive, meaning himself, making him, in fact, the de facto king.
Or put another way. Yeah. Put another way.
Wait. Let me just finish this point. So if that happens, there is no more judiciary. There is no more Supreme Court. And in fact, there are members of the Supreme Court that he may have, some bad feelings towards. Well, knock, knock, knock. Who is it? SEAL Team 6, motherfucker. Open up, right? I mean, it could happen to anyone. That's the point.
So what I would say, and to your point about consolidating power in the executive branch and Trump's visions and so on, I'd even go further and say this criticizing his own appointees to the court is itself pretty toxic. He's gone after Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett and Gorsuch when they have not ruled the way that he sort of expected them to, or Alina Habba made a reference, his attorney Alina Habba made a reference to, Brett Kavanaugh is going to do the right thing here, Trump. And essentially, we wash our back, I wash your back, you wash mine. And, that's really bad. Let's go back to 2010 when Obama didn't even name check a particular justice or anybody. He merely, in his speech to Congress, challenged an opinion of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that this, and this. And Alito very famously said, not true. Mouthed the words, not true. And it was this maelstrom of how dare Barack Obama say a word about the Supreme Court. And he sort of backed down from it and so on. But you're talking about something different here and another level of taking on the other branches of government in a way that hasn't been seen before.
But there won't be other branches of government if Donald gets his way. That's the point. You think guys like Jared Moskowitz is safe, Dan Goldman, Jamie Raskin? You think that Nancy Pelosi is safe? No. Like I said before, knock, knock. Who is it? SEAL Team 6, motherfucker. Right? You're going to Gitmo. Hey, you're getting a vacation.
It's not out of the question. No. And I think partly because of this idea that Trump and his supporters feel that, quote unquote, the Biden administration has prosecuted the former president. So there's so many flaws in that argument. Number one, of the various cases being brought against the former president, only 2 of them are federal cases to begin with, even brought by federal cases. You have New York, you have DC, and you have Mar-a-Lago.
Right. But you have Georgia and you have New York.
Right.
Both state cases.
Those are state cases. Number 2, these are a number of them are civil suits. One brought by Attorney General, one brought by E. Jean Carroll, but they're all lumped together in the eyes of Trump supporters as the Biden administration coming after the former president. So that's point 1, this idea that they, 2, the idea that the Biden administration has abandoned all process and just gone after the former president and is targeting its number 1 rival for the presidency. Again, to your point a little bit earlier, Michael, presidents since time immemorial have run against their opponents and not been prosecuted by them. It's not that Joe Biden has opened the floodgates of prosecuting his rival.
Ever look back at your butt and think you deserve better? If not, well, you should. And this year, introduce yourself and your behind to the best with Tommy John's super soft underwear, loungewear, and pajamas. Tommy John's breathable, lightweight, and moisture-wicking fabrics are designed to make you feel that much more comfortable, so you could do everything better. Their tri-blend and modal fabrics stretch 4 times more than competing brands. And Tommy John moves 16 different ways to give you plenty of breathing room. Guys are nuts about Tommy John's comfort innovations, like a supportive hammock pouch and easy access horizontal quick draw fly. So it's no surprise Tommy John sold over, get a load of this, 20 million pairs of their lint-free, fuzz-free underwear, all featuring their famous no wedgie guarantee. With thousands of 5-star reviews, Tommy John doesn't have customers, they have fanatics like me. So look, this New Year's, I made myself a resolution, and I call it my balls-to-the-wall commitment to comfort by cushioning my cojones. And I'll do it only in my Tommy John underwear. And here's why you should do it too. If you're tired of sweaty, chafing, wedgie-prone underwear, make the switch to Tommy John. Your family jewels and everything else will thank you. Wearing Tommy John makes you feel fresher, cooler, stylish, and more comfortable than other brands of underwear. So like me, if you do, you will become a fanatic of Tommy John too. Plus, your most valuable assets are always protected with Tommy John's best pair you'll ever wear or its free guarantee. So go right now and shop Tommy John and get 20% off your first order right now at TommyJohn.com/Cohen. That's save 20% for a limited time at TommyJohn.com/Cohen. TommyJohn.com/Cohen. See site for details.
Well, the problem is that his rival allegedly engaged in some serious misconduct and is being charged for it. And then finally, this idea that you can just bring criminal charges against somebody is nonsense. Criminal charges, and I said this a little bit earlier in our conversation, have to go to a grand jury. A judge often has to sign off from them. There's all kinds of opportunities you have to challenge charges that are brought against you. And then, of course, if you make it there, you go in front of a jury, and then a jury decides your guilt.
Yeah, Elliot, you know why Donald is playing this thing about the Biden administration weaponizing the Justice Department against
it works. Him? People believe it.
Right. But you know why? Because Donald Trump knows deep down inside that he's a criminal. And he believes that everybody is a criminal, just like him. Think of my second book, Revenge, how Donald Trump weaponized the United States Department of Justice against his critics. That's my statement a year before Donald Trump came out with the exact same line. He knows what he was doing. He knows what he did to me. He made me to the first political prisoner ever held by this country, by its own country, in order to prevent somebody from exercising their First Amendment constitutional rights. He knows exactly what he did. And because he is a criminal mind, he thinks everybody has the criminal mind. So therefore, since he did it, he thinks that Joe Biden and everybody else will do it. That's a real sociopath.
Or I would say maybe he is the most base form of humanity as it exists, which is that we, when left to our own devices, revert to a state of nature where we are actually a vicious species that goes after our opponents. Right? Maybe he's on to something. I don't know. I'm trying to pop psychologize here, but. Maybe he's on it. Maybe he's right, and all of these exercises in fairness and law and decorum and humanity that we've spent 248 years going down the road. Maybe it's all been one big joke, and Donald Trump's right. I don't know.
There's been 46 presidents of the United States. The only one who's talking about rewriting the Constitution, creating an autocracy from our democracy, is only Donald Trump. I mean, there's
in fairness, Andrews, Johnson, and Jackson were also pretty aggressive in reshaping, trying to reshape. But your point's well taken that FDR or Truman or Kennedy or Reagan, he is not. I think
that is for sure. So look, assuming that the Supreme Court does not take up the case, as you and I believe, Jack Smith's insurrection case can then proceed in Judge Tanya Chutkan's court. Correct. Which I believe is supposed to start on March 4th. When do you see that trial beginning? Do you think it'll go March 4th? And more importantly, will the trial end before the election?
I think it can. It can. It definitely right now. So you and I are talking on February 7th. Right now, there's no way it starts March 4th because the case is paused while the appeal is pending. Right. So even if the Supreme Court thanks, but no thanks. That probably happens later this month. There's still a few months of pretrial proceedings that have to go on. But you could see a trial starting by the summer and wrapping by the fall, well in advance of Election Day. But March 4th is not happening. There's no chance of that, even under the quickest of timelines, just because of the pause they already have right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, my hope was that they would be able to get this case going, because it's not as if they didn't have knowledge of the case, going forward. They just did their general delay tactics and so on. My hope was that it would go before the Alvin Bragg case, which I'm supposed to be, a witness to. Truth be told, I really don't want to be a witness again. I was for the New York Attorney General, it's not a great experience, with regard to, 2.5 days on the stand. It's not a fun experience at all. And this one I expect will be even worse. I mean, there was Alina Habba, showboating and trying to create, a news story for herself. Here at least you have Todd Blanche and Neschles, who are at least more skilled attorneys. Right. My hope is that in that case, Judge Merchan, puts an end to the bullshit that went on, even with the, accusations and the attacks and the complete ignoring of legitimate facts, and then only nitpicking a line out of a 50-page document and then trying to expand on listen, that's the job of the defense attorney, but you don't have the right to make shit up. And that's my hope, was that it would be able to proceed forward on March 4th.
Yeah. And, something as an attorney, any proceeding is only as good as the control the judge has over it. Right. And allowing some of the nonsense to get in and for parties to act up, the judge really has to nip that kind of stuff in the bud. Now, you've seen in federal court, certainly in the E. Jean Carroll case, where Judge Lewis Kaplan had a far more aggressive, heavier hand. And well, there were cameras there, and federal court tends to be a little more, a little stuffier. Right. However, just the reports coming out of the courtroom were clear that the judge just wasn't having it. And to your point, it's really important
because they weren't part of the issues. That's the whole thing. He can't argue something that's not within the four corners of the case. It was determined that he sexually assaulted her. You can't go back and retry something that has already been decided. And neither
Agreed.
Trump nor Haba, or any of the others that were there, they refused to acknowledge it, and Judge Kaplan was just not having that shit. Not one second of it.
And again, this gets back to my maybe Donald Trump has just got it all right and all figured out, because we have all these rules that we've been following for a long time. One being, you got to obey the rules of court. You have to only provide evidence that is relevant. And as lawyers who are listening know, relevant evidence is evidence that proves or disproves a fact at trial, right? Well, he just got an attorney that just didn't obey that. And she just came and brought all kinds of crazy BS into the courtroom. And yeah, she lost, but they got their press releases out of it. It's just, I don't know if it's a realignment of everything we thought but I don't know. They managed to get away with it. They just did.
Could we go back to the Supreme Court hearing,
Sure.
the oral arguments that will be coming on Thursday on Trump's Colorado ballot eligibility case, and how Section 3 of the 14th Amendment applies to insurrectionists? What's your opinion on that case? And how do you think that the Supreme Court will rule?
I think they figure out a way to keep him on the ballot without weighing the question of whether he's an insurrectionist or not. And here's why. Courts, number one, they don't have to touch the insurrectionist question, because there's sort of legal questions and factual questions. As a matter of law, is the president, quote unquote, an officer of the United States? Now, you and I sitting here talking say, of course it's an office. That's dumb. Of course it is, right? But then there's a factual question, which is a little more complicated, which is, did Donald Trump engage in insurrection? Courts, 9 times out of 10, will avoid the factual question and just try to do the legal one, which is, should he be on the ballot or not? And I really think they avoid the insurrectionist question. Now, maybe you get a judge in a dissent who says, no, I think this dude actually engaged in some insurrection adjacent behavior, but I think they try to stay away from it.
Do you think that he should be on all the ballots?
Do I think he should be on all the ballots? Under the 14th Amendment, I have a hard time seeing how you have a consistent definition for what an insurrectionist is based on the mess the framers left us with. There's no way to figure out the question short of convicting someone of insurrection. And because of how ambiguous that question is, I don't think you want to get into putting him on some ballots but not others. Now, let me make another point, and this is a far more important one. Going back to 2015, everyone across the country had as much data that they needed about Donald Trump's fitness to serve as president of the United States, right? Folks had it in 2016, they had it in 2020, and they will have it again in 2024. Now, whether it takes sort of this nebulous determination of what's an insurrectionist or isn't, it's a question far above my pay grade. But I think people knew a long time ago what they were getting, and now this is all sort of manifesting itself and has over the last 5 or 6 years. But I don't think anybody should be really shocked. Any voter should be shocked at this point by what they've seen and what they're getting.
You see, I don't think that people knew exactly what they were getting in 2015, 2016. Well, I'll tell you. Let me see if I can't convince you on it. So what the campaign was about is a mega billionaire businessman that's not part of the system, that's going to buck the system in order to benefit you, the American people. Those 4 years showed something much, much more than the lie of Donald Trump being this incredible businessman that's going to make deals with all the different countries like China, North Korea, Russia, Turkey, etc. Now, here's what you learned from his 4 years as being president: that he should have run as being Captain Chaos. That this is a guy who lives in turmoil 24/7, lies like a fucking maniac, all right? Only gives a shit about himself, doesn't care about the American people, wants to change our American democracy into an autocracy, wants to king himself, make himself the king, the monarch, the ruler, supreme leader, the Führer, all right? That's something very different than what people knew about Donald Trump in 2015, 2016. Yeah, he was a TV show host. He's a funny guy. He's bombastic, but nobody ever thought that he would do and say the crazy things that he's doing today. And now you have a much greater scope. You also know one additional thing, that he is as fucking incompetent as anyone that, if not more so than anyone that has ever served as president of the United States. Not one of his pledges that he made to the American people in 2015, 2016, did he actually deliver on.
Okay. I still disagree for a number of reasons. One, government is not a business. People need to learn that government should work for the people, should work efficiently, should work well, but it is not a business with a goal of maximizing value for its shareholders above all else. And so, having worked in government for 15 years, I'll be the first to tell you it could be smaller, it could be leaner, it could be more efficient, it could work better for all of us, but it's not a business. And so the idea that you can just come in, whether he was a successful business executive or not, just run things like a business. Well, number one. Number two, folks knew who he was surrounded by, who he pledged to surround himself by. Folks knew about his indecorous personal behavior. Folks knew about the misconduct. And moreover, this idea of insurgents coming in and running for the presidency. We tried that a few different times, from Howard Dean to Wesley Clark to Fred Thompson to Bernie Sanders, all these folks. For different reasons, it didn't take hold and didn't take on. And these were all elected officials or military generals, not even of reality TV hosts. Look, America, we are who we are. I don't want to, I'll let folks decide as to American exceptionalism, whatever they want. But I will say that the notion of electing a reality star president is the kind of stuff you see in Bolivia or these countries that we would wag our fingers at. And it was an exercise that failed, that we as a country let happen. And I still maintain everyone knew everything they needed to know about what they were getting way back in 2015. You had ample opportunities for, I don't remember who else, Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush or any of these people who might have been boring, but at least would have respected the fundamental enterprise they were running. And I think in many respects that was a failure on the part of the electorate.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about that one. We'll just agree to disagree on how much the American people actually knew, as far as, because again, he's like, I'm not a politician. And that was his famous line. He's still trying to use that line, that he's not a politician, right? You were the president of the United States, you fucking moron. What do you mean you weren't a politician? You held the greatest office in the history of the country.
Of humanity, or in like global politics.
Right, literally. You're not a politician. Yeah, okay, good for you. So let me ask you this, because Justice Thomas has not recused himself in Trump's insurrection case. And that's all while his wife, Ginny, who was actively involved in the insurrection. And I still don't understand why she hasn't been charged yet. Last week I had on the show here, the MAGA granny, Pam Hempel, and so on. She was charged 1, 2, 3. Why Ginny Thomas hasn't been charged? Again, I don't know the answer to. But if you would, talk about our two-tiered justice system. Yeah. Why isn't Ginny Thomas being held to any ethical or criminal standards like everybody else has?
Well, everybody else but Supreme Court justices, and even lower court, sort of federal district court or federal court of appeals judges are held to a higher code of ethics than the United States Supreme Court is. The problem with the Supreme Court as this co-equal, if you want to use the term, branch of government, they set their own rules and they decide when they recuse from cases, they decide whether there's an ethics investigation or anything else. And they, not unlike almost like the British royal family, as we're seeing now with some of the very sad health issues facing King Charles, they decide what information comes out, they decide how they're policed and so on, and just leave us to do our business and thank you, we'll be just fine. And the Supreme Court's kind of like that a little bit. It's this almost shadowy, for lack of a better term, entity that isn't really transparent about its rules. I don't think, someone asked me just yesterday, does Clarence Thomas recuse himself? And I don't think he does, because you can't make him. You simply cannot obligate until Congress steps in and puts a toothier ethical set of rules on the Supreme Court. Nothing can make a Supreme Court justice step out of a case, barring an explicit, I mean, like really explicit financial conflict. Like if Google or something had a case and Justice Sotomayor were a major shareholder of Google and on the board and the CEO, then yeah, it's a financial conflict and she can't hear the case. But other than that,
but I'm not even sure that Congress can actually pass those ethical rules that they have to abide by. I think it has to be written and approved. Well, who writes it doesn't matter.
No,
but it has to be accepted and approved by the judiciary, by the Supreme Court. I don't think that one branch is going to be able to tell the other, because then the Supreme Court could say, well, we're going to write the rules.
They could say it's unconstitutional. Well, that's an excellent constitutional crisis question. I mean, Congress sets all sorts of parameters. They set the federal rules of evidence and criminal procedure that govern in court. They set the sentencing rules that govern in court. And I don't see what would preclude Congress from setting ethical standards or a code of ethics for the Supreme Court, or at a minimum working collaboratively with the Supreme Court to craft ethical standards. Congress has the ability to pass all kinds of legislation regulating the other branches of government. Now, maybe the Supreme Court could then say, well, that's unconstitutional, and strike down the law that Congress passed regulating the Supreme Court. But I still think they could do it if they really
wanted to.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't say if they really wanted to, they would have already done it, right?
That's a big if.
Massive. So let's just jump around for a second and talk about Judge Engoron. Judge Engoron, and to those who remember, that's the New York Attorney General case, the one that's going after Trump for the civil fraud. He's held up his ruling. We were supposed to get that ruling by the end of January. He held up his ruling on this business fraud trial because new information came out about the Trump Org's CFO, Alan Weisselberg, who testified on Trump's behalf in that case, is now negotiating a plea deal for perjury with Alvin Bragg and the Manhattan DA's office to avoid new criminal charges. How do you think that this new information will ultimately affect Judge Engoron's final order?
I don't think so. Barring some finding that evidence that was provided to him was also tainted. It's hard to know what's taking the time it does. However, with the caveat that we live in a 24-hour news cycle world and expect things to happen when we want them to happen. And it can actually take days or weeks or even months sometimes to write judicial opinions. And maybe he's trying to make sure he gets the right opinion. I'm not sure what, to the extent there's a holdup, what it is and what he's working on right now. But I don't think that any of this business changes what the judge does.
I mean, I don't think it changes the result, but I do think it changes the way that he issues the opinion. You see, Weisselberg made certain statements about whether it was the size of the unit or how the statement of financial condition was done and created, and all of that was a lie. What I also find interesting, right? So let me just stick with that first. That was all a lie. That means that if part of the testimony that is given by Weisselberg on behalf of Trump and the Trump Org is tainted, all of his testimony is tainted. I forget the Latin phrase for that, but if part is tainted, all is tainted. My point being, he was actually the Trump Org and Donald's key witness in that case. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it changes the ultimate result. I just think it changes the way that Engoron was going to write his decision.
Yeah, because you can't rely on it in the same way. And I think, there's another Latin phrase that, and I don't remember this one either. It's been a while since law school. but you excise the offending evidence and rely on other stuff. So we'll see.
Yeah. And another thing too, remember Alan Weisselberg did 100 days in Rikers Island, right? Part of that incredible fucking plea deal. I mean, this is a guy who put the system through the ringer, lied continuously, delayed the whole bit. He gets 100 days, 100 days. But part of that plea deal was that he tells the truth. I wonder what's going to happen now as it relates to Alan Weisselberg and potentially, because perjury in New York carries, I believe, up to 7 years of imprisonment. So I would really love to find out what they're going to, especially what the DA's office is, striking, what kind of a deal that they're striking, because this guy should not be given any breaks whatsoever. Yeah. He was the frick to the frack in the entire to the entire scheme.
Yeah, well, and moreover, it's not a cooperation agreement. The prosecutors aren't seeking Weisselberg's testimony here. So it's not clear what they're getting out of it. It's not clear how much they're throwing the books at him here. I don't know where this one goes. I really don't.
What's crazy too is this is not the first time that Alan Weisselberg lied to the court. Something you may not remember. CNN actually, and so did many other, news outlets. In 2021, New York federal prosecutors, I'm talking about the Southern District of New York, when they were going after me, came to suspect that Trump Organization's chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, lied in testimony during their investigation of former Trump personal attorney Michael Cohen 3 years ago. This is dated back to August of 2021, according to 4 people familiar with the prosecutor's thinking. Despite their suspicions, federal prosecutors did not pursue perjury charges against Weisselberg, but his past interactions with them could now become relevant to the Manhattan DA's office as it seeks his cooperation in a tax fraud case brought against Weisselberg and the company last month. This is not the first time. In fact, I'll tell you what more the Southern District did. They knew he was lying. They still used him and the lies when they went before the grand jury. I hate the whole grand jury system, by the way, where it's a secretive proceeding and you can't defend yourself. You don't even know that it's going on. They knew he lied. They put his fucking ass in front of the grand jury. He continued to lie, and they gave him limited immunity. There's a problem with that. And Donald Trump takes advantage of shit like this in order to, as you said, he takes the piece of sand and he creates the whole beach out of it.
And I think if people are inclined to believe the illegitimacy of the whole system and the whole process and the fact that it's stacked against the president and all that, then they'll pounce on things like that. When in reality, it is incredibly common for witnesses, particularly cooperating witnesses, to give inconsistent or even dishonest testimony. And when that happens, you have a process for dealing with it. You either punish the guy or take his testimony, excise the portions of it that are
but not in this case, Elliot. Not in this case. Yeah. They used it. They knew he was lying. Guys like Nicholas Roos and Tom McKay and Andrea Griswold, they knew he was lying. They didn't care. And they went ahead, they put the lies in front of a grand jury.
It's not good.
It's a problem with the system.
Yeah. I'm not going to fight with you on that. No, I'm with you.
Well, there's nothing really to fight. The facts are the facts. And, I believe that they should throw the book at Alan Weisselberg. I really do. Uh-huh. And I think that it's about time that he starts to properly cooperate instead of cooperating with lies and allowing prosecutors to use those lies. I just don't get it.
Yeah, I think, for the purposes of sentence, this may make your head explode, but they'll consider his age, they'll consider his role, they'll consider his criminal history in deciding whether to send him away for 7 years. Look, spoiler alert, he's not going to jail for 7 years. That's just not how criminal sentencing works. But, they'll factor in all those things in deciding how much to punish him. But look, it's not going to be 7 years. I'll say that.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. So look, let's then jump over to Fulton County, where Fulton County DA Fani Willis admitted last week to having a relationship with someone on her team. And for such a smart woman with such a big, important case, really? That's all that I say. All you've done is give Donald and his team an opportunity within which to taint the reality of what was going on there. Because now Republicans, and of course Trump and others, want her removed, and they want her RICO case completely dissolved. You think that they'll have any luck in shutting her down or shutting this whole case down?
I don't think so. I think, no, look, this whole episode of The Real Housewives of Fulton County is less than ideal, but I don't know if it taints the case, because I think you have the prosecutor's office has a few different avenues for getting out of it. I think, number one, Nathan Wade, the man she had the affair with, could probably just be removed from the case. Number two, if it got really bad, if the judge were to find that she needed to be off it, you could remove her and have someone else in the office potentially take it over. Sometimes you have a third party, like maybe the prosecutor from, I'm making this up, Cobb County, Georgia, up the road, comes in and runs it. Or, the judge slaps them on the wrist and says, this was a legally permissible relationship. It's okay. You're allowed to have it, but it just looks bad for your office. And you, prosecutor, it's up to you. Deal with the case, but you're going to have to explain to the jury when the attorneys for the defense are going to be hammering you in front of the jury, probably. Maybe you can get this in front of the jury about how, the misconduct of the prosecutors. But more than anything else, and I say this having been a prosecutor and in government for a long time, you're only as good as the faith the public has in the work you're doing. And it's embarrassing and maybe even shameful, even if the relationship itself were, within the eyes of the law, still perfectly permissible.
Yeah,
which I don't know. I just don't know enough about Georgia sex law, so I don't know what you can get away with legally in the state. What's legal, illegal, or barely legal in the state of Georgia. I'm just not sure also
what's the relevance of the fact that she had the affair. Or I shouldn't call it fair. She has a relationship. What's the relevance to the RICO charge here?
Yeah, no, nothing to the RICO charge. I think there becomes an ethics question if, depending on the amount he's paid, the $600,000 or so. Now the question is, and I also think the coverage of it's been a little bit hysterical, because I do wonder if $600,000 to one guy, or was it $600,000 to the firm? Was it salary and services? And photocopying can cost tens of thousands. Who knows? So somebody's got to sort that all out.
Agreed.
But that's the biggest issue. Do you have an ethical issue with the payment from a prosecutor's office?
So then let me jump to another case. Judge Cannon in Florida has absolutely slow walked the Trump documents case. And now we find out that there's a secret room and a locked closet at Mar-a-Lago that the FBI missed during their raid. What's your take on that case?
My take has long been that case was going to take a while to get to try. It just was. And when you're dealing with classified documents, they legally they are very challenging and complicated. Now, I think the prosecutors were in a tough spot there, because the best charge they had and have remains obstruction of justice. The obstructive conduct by Trump and the folks around him was allegedly the most egregious. The document possession cases are just harder to understand, harder for people to get their heads around. But it would have been weird to charge just obstruction without also charging an additional crime. So it was a tough case to charge, and I see why they did it the way they did, but they may have just been better off charging obstruction. But again, that case would have been really hard to bring to trial. So when was it? It was last August was the search. It would have been really hard to get to trial by Election Day 2024. Now, there are any number of commentators who said they could have. I don't know if I buy that.
So then let me ask you, why doesn't Jack Smith then move to have Judge Cannon removed?
Well, on what basis? You don't really have a good basis for removing a federal judge just because you don't like her. She hasn't done anything unethical or unsound. It's just she's taking her time. And judges often, federal judges in particular, often take their time on cases on account of pay. But you just don't, barring some, Judge Cannon having an affair with somebody or something like that, you don't really have an ethical or legal basis for getting a judge off a case. You just don't.
Okay. Listen, I totally agree with you.
Yeah,
I don't like her decisions, but I was never able to figure out, what she did that would, warrant recusal the way I'm listening to some, commentators talk about it. Look, that's the problem too with the divisiveness that's going on in this country. Just because you don't like what I'm saying doesn't mean that I should be removed, or you don't like the fact that Judge Cannon is slow walking this case. She is absolutely MAGA. She is totally pro-Trump, right? I mean, it's not news to anybody, I hope, but slow walking your case. Look, I'm still waiting for a judge to make a decision on something that should have been done in 24 hours. We're already now, 5 weeks into it. I don't get it, but they certainly have that judicial privilege.
Yeah. People even tried to make the argument way back in the day when the case was coming up that she should be removed because she got overturned and had a bad success rate. No, come on. That's bullshit. Judges get reversed all the time for different reasons.
She just shouldn't be in the position. I mean, that's the difference. But she, kissed enough, Republican ass in order to get herself elected.
Well, that's what I'm just not going to bite on.
I don't think she's competent, but then again, that's just my opinion.
But look, the rules are the rules for how you get appointed to be a federal judge in this country. It's a system that rewards patronage.
Yep.
And
she's no Justice Learned Hand, I can tell you that, or Justice Benjamin Cardozo.
But just rewards proximity to the president and the political party in power. That's the system we allowed to fester for a long time, and
we have to live with it. So let me switch gears one last time.
Sure.
There's been another shakeup at CNN, and I'm not sure that affects you as a legal analyst. But what, in your opinion, is going on over there? Look, I knew Jeff Zucker. For many years, and I thought he was fantastic at what he did. I remember when he left, there was massive instability over there. They're trying to go middle of the road, or at least they were trying to go middle of the road for at least a brief moment. But is there any such thing as middle of the road in journalism anymore? To me, it seems like everything is either left or right. The last time I saw something which was middle of the road was in Al Jazeera.
Well, it depends how you define middle of the road, right? And I think the complicated thing about covering a president or a political figure who belongs to a political party but is accused of engaging in some really egregious cross-partisan or trans-partisan misconduct is that people see it as partisan criticism. I've been very careful and very deliberate in my speaking about his cases in not making it about Democrats versus Republicans, but conduct versus misconduct. And you look at it and you look at the things that the former president is alleged to have done. And I believe, and again, I say this as someone, I'm an Eagle Scout, man. I've been following America, loving America since I was a kid. But a lot of this conduct, if true, and we saw it all play out on television. We watched the videos. We were there on January 6th. It's just a mile from my house. It's un-American behavior, not Republican or Democratic behavior. And I just think our world, which tends to reduce things to right and left, Democrat and Republican, really makes it easy to have everything appear to be partisan. And I really do believe it's just not. It's about right and wrong, not Democrat, Republican.
Yeah, look, I totally agree with you. So look, Elliot, the hour comes by real fast on Mea Culpa.
Real fast.
I have one last question for you, because one of the issues that I constantly hear on all of the stations is that Joe Biden is losing favor amongst Black men, amongst Muslims, amongst Hispanics, and so on. And I don't fully understand where that information is coming from. Whether you like Joe Biden, whether you have an issue with his age, forgetting Donald's only 2.5 years younger, right? Whether you have, whatever your issues with Joe Biden may be.
Yeah.
As Joe Biden even said, don't look at me as me. Look at me and compared to the alternative, meaning Donald Trump. under Joe Biden, under Biden, the economy is roaring right now. People could say whatever they want. If Donald Trump was in office right now with the stock market at the height that it's at, he'd be taking full and total credit. In fact, he tried to take full and total credit by saying the only reason the stock market's doing well is because he's leading in the polls and everybody knows he's going to be the next president. I mean, talk about a narcissist, right? But when it comes to, let's just say, black men and women, first of all, I don't understand how any woman could possibly want to vote for him, especially after he's taking credit for the overturning of Roe versus Wade. But as it relates to the black community, Donald Trump's own words, his own words, was he could have resolved the Civil War in 24 hours if he was president at the time. The only way that you could have done that is North stays free, South remains slavery.
Yep.
How could any person of color vote for him? Before you answer that, let me just use the same analogy as it relates to Muslims. The first thing that Donald Trump did when he got to office was to enact a Muslim ban. He tried to call it an immigration ban, but it was a Muslim ban. And Donald Trump himself said he wants to ban Islam from the country. Told it to me. Wants to ban Islam from the country. I said to him, you can't ban a religion from a country, especially not a democracy. Now, as it relates to Hispanics, the first thing he wants to do if he gets back in office, he wants to do a massive roundup of immigrants, particularly migrants, right? But immigrants, Hispanics, San Salvadorians, etc., and he wants to deport them all out of the country. Why would anybody in any of these three groups want to vote for this crazy man?
So I would say a couple things, and you know, I don't really do political analysis, so this is just me as a citizen, sort of voter in the country. And I think just looking at it, I don't get the sense that anybody or many people who didn't vote for Trump last time switched their votes to vote for Trump now. Think, well, you know, this Trump fellow seems to be saying some novel, interesting things, and I'm going to change my vote. It's really a question of who stays home and what kind of excitement any voters, particularly black or brown voters, tend to have. Now, certainly the situation in the Middle East, black voters, some of the luster from Biden has come off, I believe, on account of the Middle East. So that's
right,
part
because
of it.
The Middle East affects your day-to-day living, right?
I know. But still, this is what, you know. But the other thing I would say is that, and more to the point, I think 2024 Trump is still untested. And this is just gets back to something we talked about a little bit earlier in the program, which is that, you know, folks knew what they got in 2016 and 2020. But right now, those are still ideas and not a man running for president. Trump hasn't debated another candidate, hasn't debated Biden, hasn't really faced negative campaigning, hasn't faced commercials, any of that other business. And I don't know if people really have confronted yet the reality of what Trump versus Biden would look like in a way that, you know, it's an idea. It's still like, oh yeah, we're going to have a rematch of these two guys yelling at each other. And I don't know if the Biden folks have even started trying to make the case yet against, no, this man, not me, Joe Biden running, but Donald Trump is your alternative. And I think over time, you know, maybe some of those numbers shift, but the idea of navel gazing a year before an election is nothing new.
Right.
And I think this happens every 4 years, and we'll have to see where it goes 6 months from now. Yeah,
totally agree. Elliot Williams, thank you. Thank you so much, my friend, for joining me. Hope to see you again very, very soon, because
very soon.
I could be honest with you, nothing's going to get easier over the course of the next 10 months.
Nothing's going to get easier. Oh, nothing's getting easier.
Thank you, my friend. And I'll be seeing you soon in the green room.
See you soon. Take care.
You got it, pal.